Welcome, ladies, to our last session of Israel and Biblical Culture. We've got a couple of announcements, just housekeeping things. What we'd like you to do is, as Joan speaks, if you could write down your questions while she's talking, and that way there won't be such a gap while you're at the end when you're thinking about what you should have thought about or forgot that question you thought about. So if you could do that, that will help her. And then at 11 o'clock, we'll take a break. If she's not done speaking, she'll continue speaking, but we'll let you eat your lunches then. But in the meantime, keep those rattling papers to a minimum. Okay. Let's open in prayer, and then we'll let Joan begin. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day and for these sessions that Joan's been willing to share with us on Israel and biblical culture, and for her vast knowledge. And we just bless our time together this morning, and we thank you for the way you've provided for us in so many ways, some of which we're not even aware at times. We, again, thank you for this day, for the beautiful sunshine, and pray that you'll give us all safety as we return to our homes later. And we just pray all this in your name. Amen.
May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. Today's topic is Israel and current events. And most of the current events we're going to be talking about popped up in the news within the last 2 days. Things are never quiet there. There'll be things I'll be referencing that happened earlier, but most of the events are very current ones. Many prophecies speak of the increasingly difficult events all over the world as it comes closer to the Lord's return. But the more chaos we see in our world, the more we need to be purifying our own lives in preparation to meet the Savior. We are not to be panic-stricken. Luke 21:26 says, "Look up, lift up your heads, because your redemption draws nigh." A person who focuses on prophecy, which is what often comes out of looking at current event things, a person who focuses on prophecy is often distracted by the sensational. God intends for the warnings and the events to capture the attention of both believers and non-believers. The takeaway message is, get ready. Have you repented and turned to God? Do the prophetic events make you more committed to growing in your personal walk with Him? Or are they just something that you put in your mental file cabinet and say, oh, now I know about that? Get ready. The King is coming. Now, the two most important events in the last couple days have been between first of all, the UNESCO issue between the U.S. and Israel, their intentions to withdraw from UNESCO. And then the second event would be the reconciliation pact between Hamas and Fatah. First of all, the UNESCO is the United Nations educational, I forget what the rest of it is. But it's supposed to be a cultural and educational body, but it's creating an alternate truth and reality. And our presence on that committee pays for it, among some other countries, but we carry a large share of it. Our ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley's rationale for encouraging our withdrawal is the July decision by UNESCO to declare Hebron, which was one of Israel's historic capitals and very important in Jewish history, to declare Hebron and the tomb of the patriarchs. Now remember, the patriarchs are Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The Arabs claim Abraham, they don't claim Isaac and Jacob nor their wives. The tomb of the patriarchs as belonging solely to the Arabs, and because of the dispute of who should have control of it, they consider the site to be an endangered World Heritage Site. The second reason would be the UN's keeping of Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad on a UNESCO Human Rights Committee, despite the history of his violent repercussions. I mean, think about what you know about Syria, and yet their president is on a Human Rights Committee for UNESCO. And the third issue, and this is the one that we see so much, is that UNESCO has acted as a forum for Israel bashing and a pattern of anti-Israel discrimination. When President Trump said that he was planning to pull out of UNESCO, then Israel also said, "We'll come out with you." Benjamin Netanyahu said, because UNESCO has become the theater of the absurd, and because instead of preserving history, it distorts it. On the second major news issue, representatives from Hamas and Fatah met in Cairo and signed a unity agreement on Thursday. Now, Hamas is the U.S. designated terror organization that rules Gaza, the Gaza Strip, and Fatah is the section of the Palestinian Authority that has been in charge of the West Bank and has as their president Mahmoud Abbas. Representatives from both these organizations met, with Egypt brokering the arrangements. And in the synopsis of it, nobody has seen the actual document, to my understanding, but in the synopsis that was given out, it sounds like Fatah, which represents the Palestinian Authority, will be responsible for the day-to-day administration in all areas, including Gaza. So that takes that responsibility away from Hamas. And because there's been so much infighting between Hamas and Fatah, some of the pressure on the Gazans should be reduced. It does not, however, specify Hamas's role. But it seems that they are still in control of their arsenal and huge militia and the underground tunnels that they have built for warfare. Hamas did make the statement, "They signed the unity agreement so we can all work together against the Zionist enterprise." Obviously, it says nothing about recognizing Israel as a state, and Hamas has said they will never do that. We're not quite sure how the fact that Hamas is classified as a terrorist organization, how that will be affected by this pact. U.S. gives a lot of aid to the Palestinian authorities, and if they are in a unity government with Hamas, we don't know where that's all going. The next meeting is scheduled for November 21st in Cairo, and they're wanting to talk about a unity government. Now, there have been many pacts between Hamas and Fatah in the past, and they always quickly fall apart. The Arabs seem to only be able to work together when they are fighting a common enemy. I'm reading this quote because I had always heard this and didn't realize it was actually a part of Arab culture until I came across the same thing in the book The Hajj by Leon Uris. It gives you an indication that in the Arab mentality, they will work together against a common enemy. But if they don't have that common enemy, they're fighting among themselves. So this says, this is a young boy comment, or a boy comment, and he said, "So before I was 9, I had learned the basic canon of Arab life. It was me against my brother, me and my brother against our father, my family against my cousins and the clan against the tribe, and the tribe against the world, and all of us against the infidel." So anyone who is not Muslim is considered the infidel. If there's no Israel to work against, then they're working against the tribe. And if things are okay with the tribe, then they're working against the clan. And if the clan is okay, then they're working against their father. And if the relationships with their father are okay, then they're fighting with their brother. So historically, that's the way it's worked in peace treaties that Arabs have had with each other. And given the fact that Hamas and Fatah have been vying so much for control and for superiority, I don't have a whole lot of hopes of this really working, but it'll be interesting to see what follows. Of course, the news is saying, oh, Hamas and Fatah have made this wonderful arrangement. They're all going to work together. They're going to have this unity government. But in reality, they've said that same thing before, not quite as grandiose as this plan, but it's never worked out that way. Now, some good news that you don't usually hear. Israeli technology to help Puerto Rico deal with post-hurricane water scarcity. Israeli technology that captures humidity to supply potable water out of the air has been sent to Puerto Rico to help the island deal with the water scarcity. It can produce up to 5,000 gallons of water a day. My Jewish Chronicle, which came yesterday, which is the newspaper that comes out every week, sponsored by the Jewish community here in Columbus, and I'm not sure if there's supposed to be a subscription, but if so, I haven't paid for it for years and I keep getting it. But it's a good source of information of what's going on in the Jewish community and things that are maybe of interest to you. And they had an article on the Jews in Puerto Rico. I didn't realize until I read this I knew this part. Historians, many of them speculate that Christopher Columbus was a secret Jew. He left Spain on the day that the Jews were kicked out of Spain. And because of his connections with the government, he may have been aware that that was coming. But it also talks about, throughout history after that, Jews that emigrated to Puerto Rico. Initially, they stayed up in the hills and they were very secretive about it because since it was under Spanish rule, they were not allowed to be Jews and be there, but they kind of were anyway. But then later, when that ban was lifted, groups of them migrated there. And even like there's a group of them that came from Cuba when Castro took over. It was easier for them to migrate to Puerto Rico, which with the Caribbean type of climate and culture, than it was for them, say, to come to the United States. So there is a long history of Jews being in Puerto Rico. But in addition to the water, but it says today Puerto Rico is home to approximately 1,500 Jews. And then in addition, Israel aid organizations have sent emergency responders to help in Puerto Rico. We'll also see that they've sent teams to Mexico to help because of the earthquake, to Houston and Miami and the Florida Keys because of the Irma that came through there. Some things that Jews are doing to Arabs that will shock you. Now, this is under good news, so that's good. But some 500,000 Syrians have been killed in Syria's 6-year civil war. This power struggle between Muslim fiefdoms has created 10 million Syrian refugees. Yes, it is the country on Syria's southern border, her mortal enemy Israel, that has done more for the refugees and for those wounded in attacks than Arab countries all around them, more than all of those Arab countries put together. So that's the background to some of this. Israel has a secret field hospital, or had a secret field hospital. Up in the Golan Heights, Israel has established a field hospital to treat Syrians. Israel is known to have treated over 3,500 wounded Syrians at this field hospital and in other Israeli hospitals, saving many of their lives. Despite the image the media spreads of an imperialist apartheid state, this is the real Israel. A little child who lost his legs was screaming in the trauma room, "Don't treat me because we don't have money to pay for the hospital." The Israeli Arab interpreter who was with him tried to calm him down and said, "If we want to give you life, we will treat you without you having to pay." Now, the field hospital has been closed, but this is not a bad thing specifically. The military decided it would instead do emergency treatment in military ambulances while the people were on the way to a hospital in northern Galilee. The Israeli Northern Command said the closing of the field hospital was done to increase the efficiency, and that if the field hospital is needed again, it can be reopened. They say before they came, they thought we were the great Satan, the enemies, and they looked for the tail between our legs. Remember, we've talked about caricatures and lies. A rebel fighter who was being treated remarked, "Syrian President Bashar al-Assad didn't take care of us. Here in Israel, we are being taken care of us. Assad doesn't care about us, whereas Israel does. Assad fires shells at us. He doesn't care about us at all." Another good news. Meet the American Israeli who is working as a taxi driver. Moti is doing this in order to donate his tips to Syrian refugees, and he educates his passengers in the process. He actually owns several businesses, but he's doing this to be able to help the Syrians. He's entered into Syria more than 10 times. Now, this is a country that hates Jews. Each time he saves a life, he is putting his life at risk in a country where children grow up believing Israelis want to harm them. He just took a pita bread maker into Syria that will feed 50,000 people. He recently spoke of his work, and when asked where would the Syrians that he helped be without his aid, he said, "Dead." The interviewer said to him, "You've spent 6 years and millions of your own dollars to save the lives of Arab citizens from their Syrian government. You had worked with opposition groups within Syria, lobbied for Israel and the U.S. government for the establishment of a safe zone in southern Syria. Asked the Israeli government to admit Israeli refugees to the Israeli hospitals. Provided Syrians with SIM cards so that they can use their cell phones to document atrocities. Sent a ton of kosher food for Syrian celebrations of an Islamic holiday. Muslims who follow strict Islamic dietary laws often buy kosher food because they know kosher food falls within their dietary laws. You've collected medical equipment for a field hospital in Syria and helped deliver nerve gas antidote to doctors. Why do you do all this? Moti's reply, "Because I'm a Jew. As Jews, we must swear never again, not only to Jews, but to others as well. The Syrians are our neighbor." Another unusual story. 100 tons of secret love coming from the Jews. An Israeli group has collected 100 tons of supplies for Syrian refugees. Winter coats, boots, warm clothing, sleeping bags, to be donated to those fleeing from war. But here's the catch. All the labels that have Hebrew on them must be removed. And it's routed through a third country, so there's no evidence to the receivers that it came from Israel. Now, sometimes people say, well, you're only doing that to get the recognition. No recognition here. I want those Syrian refugees who have been taught lies about the character of Israelis since birth to know the truth about us. But even as they are wearing Israeli jackets and Israeli boots, they will assume we hate them. Arabs and Jews getting along together somewhat. The mayor of Efrat. Now, Efrat is an Israeli community. I'm not sure how many are there. I'm going to guess somewhere between 10 and 20,000 people. It's part of the Gush Etzion block, just 15-minute drive south of Jerusalem. Approximately 30 Palestinians and hundreds of Israelis attended a holiday event. Remember, we just finished the Feast of Sukkot, which is the Feast of Tabernacles in Israel. And in Israel, the Jews build temporary booths to remind them of their sojourn in the wilderness. Those booths are to have tops that are usually made with something like palm branches, but something that has holes in it so they can see through and see the stars. And the Efrat mayor hosted, who was a fairly young man, hosted 30 Palestinians in his sukkah to commemorate coexistence. The identities of the Palestinians, many of them leaders in their community, because Efrat and that Gush Etzion block is surrounded by bunches of small Arab villages. The members' names were not revealed because last year, 4 Palestinians who attended a similar event were arrested by the Palestinian Authority and detained for 4 days for meeting with murderers of babies. Now, some years ago, I was in Efrat. Shlomo Riskin is a very famous rabbi, and he's the chief rabbi of Efrat, and he started a whole school and a whole complex there. His brother-in-law was a rabbi in Dayton, and I was doing a group for Christians and Jews together, and his brother-in-law was the rabbi that I was working with from Dayton. And I went, since I'd never been to Efrat before, when I was in Israel on a previous trip, I went there to meet the people there at Shlomo Riskin's Institute and the people that we would be interacting with as I worked with this group. And the man that was my host for the day took me to a neighboring Arab village. And it was fascinating because it was a small village with very rutted roads. And as we drove by, the kids all came out and said hi to him, and it was like he was their best friend. Well, they'd been doing a project where Israel contributed know-how and the Palestinians contributed people willing to work. And I don't remember what the project was, but it was a project that benefited the community, and it was a cooperation kind of project. We were supposed to go visit Efrat. When it got closer to the time that it was time to go, my host from Efrat contacted me, and he said, "We're not going to be able to go to that community. They have been under things going on by the Palestinians." And he said it would not be safe for them. Not that we wouldn't be safe. We'd be okay. But it wouldn't be safe for them if they had more interaction with our community. So we're not going to be able to go. Since the intifadas have started, anytime an Arab works with a Jew, they are referred to as collaborators, and it is not unusual to hear of them being killed. The Palestinian frequently arrests Palestinians who promote coexistence. In September, the Palestinian arrested a resident of Hebron for hosting Likud Minister of the Knesset, Rabbi Yehuda Glick, for the ending of the Muslim holiday. So it was kind of the reverse of what the mayor of Efrat did. Last time, a group of Palestinians who attended a multi-faith prayer organized by a Jewish leader were assaulted by a group of Pharaoh Arabs belonging to the anti-mobilization movement. Israeli philanthropist gives a grant to a hospital in northern Israel to treat Syrian children who have hearing loss resulting from their time in a war zone. 1 of every 3 Syrian children from combat areas suffers from major hearing loss. The children are provided testing, treatment, surgery, and rehabilitation. They've treated more than 1,000 Syrians this way. Next item. Mexican president gives thanks Israel for quick help with the earthquake. Mexican president contacted Israel and thanked them for the search and rescue teams that had been sent to Mexico City after the earthquake. Do we hear about this? I mean, think how small Israel is. Think if our state, it's the size of our state of New Jersey. Is New Jersey going all over the world and doing these things to help people? Israel was the first foreign group to give assistance. And their work team was made up from 71 soldiers who focused on extracting trapped survivors. Now remember, Israel is used to dealing with disasters. So they're good at this. And when Netanyahu greeted the team upon its return the end of September, so it's just 2 weeks ago, he told the soldiers they were the long arm of Israel, the long humanitarian arm that reaches around the world, and you show the true face of the state of Israel. Next item. Israeli company just completed the design and development of an artificial cornea. Israel is in the forefront of design for computer-related items and medical-related items. They're hoping to have, they've designed it, they've developed it and designed it, they've done tests on it. They're hoping to have the first implant in humans by mid-2018. It said that what this helps with, 20 to 30 million patients are in need of this kind of remedy worldwide. And there are 2 million new cases each year. They would alleviate the suffering and disability of millions of people if they are able to make use of this new cornea thing. Another interesting poll. Arabs prefer to live in Israel. Does that sound like the news you hear? It's becoming increasingly difficult to describe Israel as an apartheid state, like many people in the world do, when a firm majority of Arabs say they actually prefer life in the Jewish state. The survey asked local Arab residents how they personally viewed the state of Israel. A firm 60%, majority of Arabs overall, said they held a favorable view of Israel, while only 37% described their view as unfavorable. Among Arab Muslims, the view was 49-48 in favor, just barely. And among Christian Arabs, the view was 61% in favor. Nearly all Druze, 94%, said they view the state of Israel favorably. Now remember, the Druze are an offshoot of Islam. They reside primarily in the Golan Heights and in the area of Mount Carmel, and some down somewhere around the Tel Aviv area. Those are the Druze that are in Israel. There are lots of Druze in Syria. There are lots of Druze in Lebanon. And the Druze as a group are normally very loyal to the country that they're in. So the Druze, actually a lot of Druze fight in the Israeli army. Normally the Arabs do not fight in the army because they could have relatives that they would be fighting against. But the Druze basically say, we are loyal citizens of the state where we live, so we will help defend that state. And 94% of them said they have a favorable reaction to Israel. An overwhelming 63% majority of the Arabs said Israel is a good place for them to live. Arab Israelis are citizens of the Jewish state with full rights, and women enjoy full equality and personal freedom. The Israeli government is investing 15 million shekels, which would be roughly $5 million, a little bit less than that, to integrate 1,500 Arab citizens into high-tech industries. This will contribute to their well-being and help narrow the economic gaps between Jews and Arabs in Israeli society. Now compare this with how Jews are treated in Arab countries. With the Arab governments put out roughly $5 million to help Jews improve their working condition and their economic condition. The news that we see from Israel is often distorted. This is a story back from 1996, but I think it illustrates something that would be useful for you to know. I was in Jerusalem for the Sukkot conference, where normally 5,000 Christians from all over the world come to celebrate the holidays with the Jews. And the first few days of the conference, there were sessions going on during the day that the ladies that I had with me were attending that I wasn't particularly interested in. And so I was running all around the city. And that evening, I watched the news on TV, and it was one of the major English news networks. I don't remember if it was BBC or CNN, but it was one of those. And the man who was broadcasting said, "This is so-and-so reporting from Jerusalem." Now, the video that was running behind him showed hand-to-hand combat of Israeli soldiers, you could tell by their uniforms, and Palestinians, you could tell by their keffiyeh and their dress. And he went on to say how bad conditions were in Jerusalem and Israel and how things just were not working out. And then the video segued to tanks, two sides of tanks firing on each other. And his conclusion at the end of the article was, because of the failed peace agreements, because the Israelis and Arabs just can't get along, we expect things to get much worse tomorrow. And I'm thinking, I just spent the day running around the new part of the city and the old part of the city. Not only did I not see anything, I didn't sense anything was wrong. Now, I've been there often enough that, and I have been in situations where there are problems. And there's a whole sense to the air. The Israeli population just reacts. And you know something's going on, even if you don't know what at that point. I didn't sense anything. So I thought, So the next day, I watched the evening news again. Different words, but exactly the same idea, and the same footage. And after the second or third day, I thought, I should call home and tell my mom that it's not like it appears on the news, because she's going to be really worried about me. I mean, she worried anyway, but she's going to be especially worried. I mean, this looks like the whole city of Jerusalem is under siege, and she knows that I'm here in Jerusalem for 8 days. And then I thought, but maybe there's something going on behind the scenes that I am not aware of. And if I tell my mother that everything's okay and then it does get worse the next day, she'll never believe me again. So I didn't. That same type of newscast continued for 8 days. We left Jerusalem. Well, in the process, I discovered that the footage showing the hand-to-hand combat was at Shechem, the tomb of Joseph. And it was the Israeli soldiers trying to keep the Arabs from totally obliterating the tomb area. And this kind of thing happens in that particular spot every few years. but they were using that footage that had happened a few days before I arrived to make it sound like that was in Jerusalem right now. I mean, it's north of Jerusalem, and it's not far, but it's like a different world. When my group left Jerusalem and we went up into the Galilee, we then went up into the Golan Heights, and I discovered that there had been war games going on. You see, the Golan is home to most of Israeli tank brigades. And the video they had showed was war games between Israeli tanks and Israeli tanks. Was the news accurate information? Technically, yes. The fighting had happened between the Israeli soldiers and the Palestinians, but it was a limited time. It was a specific incident. Had the tanks firing at each other happened? Yes, but it was Israeli war games. But what the news portrayed was a totally different situation. Dr. Randy Smith was in Lebanon during the earlier Lebanon War. And he was there with a complete film crew to film video footage for the Life of Jesus, a video that they were getting ready to produce. He was there when the war broke out. So he was on the wrong side of the line when the war broke out. And so he said, I'm stuck here. I might as well take video footage. So he did that, and they started sending it back to a major news source in the U.S., and he said he learned very quickly after watching some of the programs that the footage he sent back bore very little resemblance to what they played. Yes, it had come from him, but the way it had been edited and the verbiage that went with it, he said he realized that what they wanted was not accurate information. What they wanted was a sensational anticipation of what's going to happen tomorrow, so that listeners or readers, if you're dealing with a media source, will want to come back to their product the next day again. So when you hear news from Israel, you have to learn to read between the lines. Some reoccurring lies. In Europe, various Christian organizations are asking for the Israelis to stop inciting the violence in Israel. They put the blame for what happens, and this one came after the Temple Mount incident, where some Palestinians were killed because they had attacked Israeli soldiers, and then they got weapons out of Al-Aqsa, and the Israeli soldiers shot them back. And then the Israelis put up metal detector cameras, which then had to be taken down. Okay, the response to all of that from Europe, from the World Council of Churches, was Israel should stop inciting the violence, basically blaming Israel for what was going on when Israel was just trying to protect their people, rather than blaming the source of the program. And then right after that, there was a documentary on Palestinian TV that blamed the Jews for trying to set fire to Al-Aqsa Mosque. Now, this is a story that happened in 2017. They're referencing a situation that happened in 1969, and they're blaming Israel for it, and they're saying that Israel prevented the fire from being put out. When in reality, it was the fire was set, but it was set by a deranged Australian who is now incarcerated and in a mental hospital. But the Jews were held blameful for it. A good result of the earlier incident with the Temple Mount is that there is an increase in the number of Jews visiting the Temple Mount. The count this year during Sukkot was 2,265. That's a 40% increase over last year. Of course, In the process, Jordan claims that Al-Aqsa is being stormed by settlers and Jewish extremists. Now, we can't totally blame our news media because there's sensational or fake news also put out by Christian organizations. Remember the blood moon issue last year? And then there was the eclipse recently? And then there was the September 23rd speculation. Those issues that involve signs, first of all, are regional. They're not worldwide. They frequently don't fit the biblical text that is being quoted. And at best, it's stretched. Parts of the text are cherry-picked and or taken out of context. And date setting never works. Because these kinds of things are purely speculations, I don't give them any serious consideration. People will often say, what do you think about the blood moon? What do you think about the eclipse that's going to come up? You know, all these things are going to align, and this is something that the astronomers are saying. And it's like, you know, I don't pay a whole lot of attention to it because it doesn't fit Scripture. You've taken bits and pieces of Scripture and put forced puzzle pieces together that don't really fit together. 2 Timothy 2:23 admonishes us to refuse foolish and ignorant speculations, knowing that they produce quarrels. So my getting involved in that kind of thing, I just don't. I've seen so much of that over my lifetime. And it never turns out to be what the people who start the idea are hoping it's going to be, and Christians get all excited because maybe this is going to happen. Pay attention to what the Scripture says. Do what it's telling you to do. Don't create scenarios that really aren't valid. Now, there's another type of Christian news that's, I think, counterproductive, and that's what I call misleading headlines. For instance, this is a major internet Israeli source for news. And it says, construction under Temple Mount preparing for Third Temple. Along with this kind of heading would go things like, red heifer found. This article says that the headline sounds like they're doing something to prepare for the third temple with construction that's happening under the Temple Mount. But then as you read the article, it goes on to say, a non-Jewish architect from New Zealand visited Jerusalem. He was sure he was seeing the beginnings of construction on the third temple, but he mistook simple maintenance, shoring up the walls, for pre-Messianic construction. There are many times that you will find sensational headlines without substance to them. And so, I do that myself. I will read headlines a lot of times to get the gist of something without reading the whole article. This gives Christians a bad name. Valid news. The 10 lost tribes are not lost. This article from the Times of Israel, September 4th. A trove of clay imprints from official documents indicate that after the destruction of the kingdom of Israel, so this would be the northern kingdom, refugees fled to the kingdom of Judah, the southern kingdom. The headline of this says, Jerusalem welcomed Jewish refugees 2,300 years ago. A new discovery of First Temple clay seals was discovered at the excavation at the city of David. And it shows a mixture of names from the kingdom of Israel and Judah used on official bureaucratic correspondence dating from after the fall of the northern kingdom at the hands of the Assyrians in 72 BC. That's interesting because people are, well, the 10 tribes are lost. Well, apparently a bunch of them migrated south to Jerusalem. I'm going to go ahead and pray so that you can start eating, and then I probably have about another 15 minutes or so. And then after that, I'll take questions. So if as I've said something, if you think of something, oh, but I'd like to ask about that, please make a note of it. But let's pray. Dear Lord, I thank you for these ladies who have been coming faithfully, and for those who've been watching online. I pray that this series of teachings will encourage their hearts to have a passion for your people, but even more than just that they'll have a passion for you, that they'll want to know you better, they'll want to know your heart, and to know what you're telling them to do. How should this affect their lives? Just thank you for this opportunity. And thank you for this time to share together in learning and also in a meal. We know that biblically, when someone eats together, they have a relationship with each other. And I thank you for the relationship with this group of ladies. I pray this in the name of Yeshua HaMashiach. Amen. Okay, go ahead and eat, and we'll come back to this. The next one I had of valid news has to do with the kibbutz status. Those of you who are familiar with the kibbutzim, I think they're still taping. If you can sit down, please. Those of you who are familiar with kibbutzim, any of you who've been to Israel, the kibbutz movement started in the early years of the early 1900s. First kibbutz was Kibbutz Danya up by the Dead Sea. Up by the Sea of Galilee. And the premise was, because we have such a hostile conditions around us, we need to band together to try to survive. So some people would work while some people would take care of the children, some people would do the laundry, some people would keep watch against the enemies that were around them. And things went well for a while. Everybody had everything in common. So everybody had the same style of living arrangements. Everybody had the same style of clothing. Nobody had anything better than anybody else. But in the more recent years, and a kibbutz member said something to my dad. He said, the kibbutz provided for all my needs, but it didn't make allowance for my wants. So I left the kibbutz. Well, the kibbutzim have been struggling because they agreed to take care of everybody from the cradle to the grave, and they were getting more and more old people who were needing taken care of, and fewer younger people who wanted to be contributing to this economic system. So some of them went bankrupt. The government propped up a bunch of them. Well, they've discovered medical marijuana. And the government has, in February, some of the kibbutzim have been doing a pilot type of program. And in February, the government threw its support behind legislation that would allow the export of medical marijuana. There are about 250 kibbutzim right now, and many are looking for new investments. So the gist of this article said they're thinking this may be their salvation. Interesting premise. And speaking of salvation, here's the one I wanted. Information coming from Messianic organizations. There is no way to tell the exact number, but we estimate that there are approximately 15,000 Jewish believers in Israel today, in addition to the Arab believers. They come from various backgrounds and walks of life. The majority are still coming from immigrants, many from the former Soviet Union and North and South America. But there are a growing number of Sabras. Now, Sabra is a native-born Israeli, both individuals and entire families who are coming to faith, young and old, Sephardic and Ashkenazi. Now, Sephardic would be the Jews who come from the countries around the Mediterranean Rim. Ashkenazi would be those Jews who come from the countries in Northern Europe and Russia, and those areas. You might want to take a look at this picture. It's a group of Israeli soldiers, and it says these Messianic soldiers in the Israeli army, they are very bold about their faith. This survey was done, I believe it was February of 2016, so it's about a year and a half old, but as surveys go, that's not bad. They said there were, I'll have to come up with it later, but there are several hundred Messianic soldiers. And they interviewed, I think the response to the survey was like 80 of them that responded in the survey. Interestingly, 43% are in non-combat service, 57 of them are in combat service. Now think of what the Israeli army goes through in combat. This is not yeah, you're on a combat unit, but you sit at home and do a desk job. This is your life is on the line every day. These are the soldiers that you see patrolling around Jerusalem in the Old City. These are the soldiers that would have been up at Nablus when that incident happened there. The question was asked, do fellow soldiers and officers know about your faith in Yeshua? 10 or 20 years ago, soldiers who would have been asked questions about that would have responded that there were very hostile responses from their fellow soldiers and from their supervisors. Now, fellow soldiers know about their faith in Yeshua in 96% of the cases. Their officers or supervisors know about their faith in Yeshua in 78%. And what is the response from these fellow soldiers and the officers? Their fellow soldiers, 64% of those who know about their faith responded positively. 22% responded indifferently. I don't care, it's your deal, whatever. 14% responded negatively. But their officers, 69% of them responded positively. 31% were indifferent, and only 4% responded negatively. That's a huge change from what it was 10 or 20 years ago. Comments that they made. Most of the soldiers have never heard about Messianic Jews and want to hear more about Yeshua. Another one said, unfortunately, when I talk about my faith, most of the soldiers in my unit don't really care. Another one said, my officer was surprised and asked lots of questions. Tel Aviv prides itself on being the most gay-friendly city in the world. But on the other hand, the people of Tel Aviv are among the most open to the gospel in Israel. In Jerusalem, you have a much higher Orthodox population, and they don't want to hear anything about Yeshua. And as we've said before, they would call him Yeshu, which is an acronym meaning may his name be blotted out. But in Tel Aviv, they're an open, free society. So you want to tell me about Yeshua? Sure, I'll take your literature. There are a number of well-known street evangelists and beach evangelists operating in Tel Aviv. The people are open to hearing about it. And then the one thing that I just find really exciting is Israel College of the Bible. It started in Jerusalem originally. They moved to a campus in Netanya, which is north of Tel Aviv. It is run by educated, like with their PhDs, native-born Israelis. They're teaching classes to students who want to study the Bible in a Hebrew setting. The classes are Jews and Arabs studying together. And I think it was this last year, they ran a term for pastors. Now in Israel, there are a lot of small congregations, and I mean, the size of this congregation would be one of the, not the largest at all in Israel, but it would be a good-sized congregation in Israel. But this series of classes for pastors, many of the Israeli pastors have never had formal Bible training. Now, they studied the Bible in school because it's part of their curriculum. But in terms of going to a seminary, something like that, most of them have never done something like that. So they had a series for Arab pastors and Jewish pastors together. And on the Israel College of the Bible website, they have a video talking about that experience and the pastor's experience of working and studying together. Many times Jews and Arabs just don't interact with each other because there are Arab communities and there are Jewish communities. And it's not that the Jews would not be willing to act with them, it's just the Arabs put themselves at risk if they interact with Jews, and many of them just it's kind of like when you're in a city that has a Chinese community or in a Little Italy or whatever. They stay pretty much within their own community, and that's the way that often works in Israel. But it's exciting to see like one of the Arab students saying, "This is the first time I ever interacted with a Jew," and that they're a believer is exciting. The organizations and the congregations in Israel sponsor conferences, camps for young people. You can pray for them. It's not easy. It's very hard. Much more opposition there than we have here. Far more. And the background of being told, if you're a Jew, you don't believe in Yeshua. And what does it mean when the young person goes home and says, I've become a believer in Yeshua, and their family says, you are being disowned? Now remember, in Israel, it is illegal to witness to a Jewish child. You can also not offer any type of enticement, monetary or services or anything. But to an adult, you can share your faith. And it's exciting to see what's happening and to see that more native-born Israelis are reaching more native-born Israelis. So if you want to swing by here and just take a look at the faces of these young people and use them as an idea to remember to pray for them. Also, some of you have asked me about how do you get information about what's going on at the Jewish Center? Well, one thing would be to request the Jewish Chronicle. But there's also something coming up. Each fall, they do a Shabbat weekend type of thing where they're attempting to encourage more people to participate in Shabbat. This event actually takes place over October 26th through 28th, but the evening of October 28th, which should be a Saturday evening, there's a Havdalah service and a concert and a dessert reception, and it's if your mind is open and you want to see what Jewish things look like, it would be interesting to go to. It's the Meshuggah, which is a musical group made up from people from different congregations here in Columbus. They're doing an a cappella concert. So if you're looking for something and a way to go, just remember, if you go to the Jewish Center, go to learn. You are their guest. There's a lot you don't know, and you need to act very respectful of them and their cultures and just basically go to learn. So if you want to see that, that's up here also. Anybody have questions that you wrote down or anything that you're thinking of that you'd like to ask? Yes. Oh, sorry, we need a microphone. Pam will get it.
I just wanted to hear a little bit more about the 10 tribes not being lost. You mentioned it, but I didn't grasp.
The seals that were found, these clay seals on government documents, indicate by family names that a huge portion, a huge number of people from the northern tribes that are often considered as being lost had actually migrated south to Jerusalem, to the kingdom of Judah, and were part of the government in that kingdom. So when we say the tribes are lost, yes, a lot of Jews were taken into captivity, but the tribes were not wiped out. There were a lot of people who moved south and escaped that. Any other questions? Jerry?
You mentioned Intifada, and I was wondering if you could give us more background, kind of the history of that and the current state.
Oh dear, I don't have my dates in my head.
Or just kind of in general.
Intifada means, it's the Arab word for uprising. And it took place multiple times in Jerusalem. So there's a first Intifada, there's a second Intifada. The last rounds of stabbings last year is sometimes called the third Intifada, but not across the board. Basically, it's a time of increased attacks on Jews and the Arabs doing things to protest in demonstration that they know will bring Jewish military and police out, and basically they can trigger more violence. When things happen, they also dictate to the Arab shopkeepers in Jerusalem, you must close your shop tomorrow. We're protesting because of the Intifada. Now you say, well, that hurts them. How does that help their cause? That's my perspective. It does hurt them, the Arabs. But their sense, remember when we talked about culture and it being a collective society and doing things for the good of the group rather than the individual, they're looking at this saying, we are standing up for our cause. And yeah, it hurts me as a shopkeeper, but we're letting the world know, we get world paying attention to us when we do these kinds of things. So it was a time of violence and a time of increased rioting and demonstrations, but it's characterized by its intense violence. Brenda? Oh, I thought you were raising your hand.
Wow. Okay. I did some contribution to some young people Israeli young people, I have heard, if they have their parents' permission, can go to camps where they learn of the Lord.
That's true. That's true.
So,
but you can't just go up with that. That is very critical. They must have parental permission to do something like that, and then you can share God with them. Sometimes those would be parents who are believers. Sometimes they're not believers. They just say, "Hey, it's a chance for my kid to go to camp, and yes, I will sign off if they can do this." But to go to youth meetings, anything like that, they have to have parental permission in order to stay away from being in trouble with the law. So yes, that is true. Anybody else? Yes.
It's the Center for, what was it? Israeli Center for Biblical Studies, or was it a college? You
Israel
mentioned?
College of the Bible?
Yeah. Is that online? Could you find
Yes.
information about it?
Yes. Google Israel College of the Bible, or they have a parallel organization called One for Israel, and that's all one word when you're looking for it online, and for is spelled out. One for Israel is the media part of that, and they have amazing things on there directed to Jews and also to Arabs, and they have videos about the college. They have videos about, they have hundreds, if not thousands, of videos taped of people, of Jewish people who have accepted Yeshua as their Messiah. Those are fascinating to listen to. They also have videos on there of some of their people, some of their staff people, going out onto the street, just talking with regular Israelis and asking them questions, which is a mental prodding. Remember the concept of provoking them to jealousy? Or it's very common in Judaism to start with a question. What do you think about thus and so? They'll go that route. Now, those videos are in Hebrew, but they have subtitles. And I find myself having trouble reading the subtitles because I keep wanting to watch the people's faces. But there's some very interesting things on their website. They have a web program because Israelis are so tech-oriented. Israelis, if I remember right, have a higher number of cell phones per capita than the U.S. does. And they're in the forefront of computer design, so they're just very tech savvy. And so they have a huge web presence with aspects designed to reach out to both Jews and to Arabs. Okay, let's see if there's anybody else first, because we'll cut the tape then. Anybody else? Okay.
I've heard that Netanyahu has Bible study every single day. Is that true?
My understanding, and this was from a statement from him, is that he reads the Bible weekly. So that would cut out the everyday. Now,
okay.
I can't guarantee that he doesn't, but his statement was, I read the Bible every week.
We need to pray for him.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, yes. Okay. I hope you've enjoyed your time. It's been fun. I really enjoy doing this. I enjoy doing it with a passion. So thank you for the opportunity. No.